I first met Ray in the hospital about a week before his surgery. He was 75 years old, but he seemed to be in really great shape. In fact, he said he played competitive tennis at least 3 times a week. And he told me that being able to be physically active was one of the most important things in his life. Well, he came through the surgery fine, but about 3 days post-op, he developed a rare and a deadly lung infection. So the medical team called his family together to talk about the situation. They told him that Ray's lungs had been so compromised, and a lot of the damage was irreversible, that he needed to be put on a ventilator in order to help him breathe. He said that surgery would be the only way that they could stop the infection. So his son asked, so what does that mean? He said, well, the surgery is successful and we can stop the infection, he should be fine. Well, the family were ecstatic. They thought that, hey, this is great, he's going to be back to normal. And they're about ready to agree to the surgery. But thinking about what the doctor said about the damage to his lungs, I asked him, I said, so if he gets through this infection, is he going to be able to come off the ventilator? The doctor says, oh no, he'll always be on the vent. I mean, he'll be fine, he'll be able to live a lot longer. He'll even be able to sit up. Well, the patient's family, I mean, they were in shock. For them, when they said he would be fine, they forgot everything else that the doctors had said about his condition. All they heard was fine. And the doctors, on the other hand, having told the family about the condition of his lungs, assumed that they knew that he'd always be on a ventilator. It's because of situations like this that I care so much about effective communication. For without it, patients and families often make critical decisions based on assumptions. And often these assumptions are based on things that they want to hear, not the things that have been told to them. And all too often, these assumptions prove to be wrong. In fact, the journey that brought me here today, in fact, was a result of my not hearing what was being said. My daughter was a junior in high school. She expressed interest in going to Hawaii for college. She actually even went there for 6 weeks that summer as an intern and loved the experience. And so as a senior, she actually got scholarship offers from University of Hawaii and Hawaii Pacific University, among other schools on the mainland. It was then that she started voicing some concerns about actually being in Hawaii. And so we were talking one night, and the conversation kind of went like this. She said, you know, I really liked being in Hawaii last summer. I love being at the beach. And I think I really love University of Hawaii. But I mean, it's just too far away from my family and my friends. And then as we were talking on about some other issues, she just said, well, you know, if you got a job in Hawaii, would you move there? Well, I grew up in Hawaii, and I had talked about that before. And so this is what I heard. I heard her say, you know, I really loved being in Hawaii last summer, and I really want to go to school at University of Hawaii, but it's so far away from everyone. But if you got a job here, that'd be great. Well, I actually got a job offer at Maui Memorial Hospital. And I went there to interview in May, and they gave me the job. So I called Corinne right away, thinking she'll be thrilled. So I got on the phone, I said, hey, I got the job. Now you can come to school in Hawaii. Silence. I go, hey, isn't that great? Now you can come to Hawaii. More silence. I said, what? She said, well, I kind of decided to go to Arizona State. So we talked about her going to Arizona State and all the benefits for her going there. And it was actually a better situation for her. And so making one last stab at it, I ended the conversation by saying, just know you're going to the desert and I'm in paradise. Well, I found myself working in Hawaii, in part because I didn't listen to what she was telling me. I only heard what I wanted to hear. But when I was there, I got to work with oncology patients for the first time. I actually spent about 4 or 5 hours a day working with patients undergoing chemotherapy. And I realized right away that the family members and loved ones were experiencing as much, if not greater, amounts of stress than the patients themselves. In fact, I spent between 25 and 30% of my time talking to a family member, either because the patient wanted me to, or they needed some help. Now, working with cancer patients, I got to be proactive for the first time, because hospital chaplaincy is by its very nature reactionary. We're called upon to help people in crisis. The problem is when you're working with people in crisis, two things can happen. It can bring families together, but I've also seen it tear families apart. And one of the reasons for that negative reactions is because in a crisis situation, we're just so emotionally charged. And I found that the more we have invested emotionally in a person or a situation, the faster that logic seems to leave the building. We don't listen to what people are saying. We're just concerned about us being right and what we need to have accomplished. But now working with oncology patients, I thought, well, how can I help people before they get to that crisis situation? I'm meeting these people at the beginning of their journey, and what can we do to maybe mitigate what's going to happen in the future? So when I came back to the mainland, I started a volunteer chaplaincy at Valley Medical Oncologist in Pleasanton. And I developed a patient-family survey to help families better communicate what they're going through. It was an assessment to find out where they were emotionally and spiritually and how they were together, if they were connecting or not. And I think the greatest tool, though, the greatest benefit to this survey is that it starts a conversation. It helps people to communicate their thoughts and their feelings and be able to share at the beginning of their journeys. It helps them connect. Jeff and Karen's story really epitomizes the value of this survey and what it does. Jeff was referred to me by a mutual friend, knowing that I worked with cancer patients. He told me that Jeff's wife was undergoing treatment for cancer and that he was having some problems. So I met with Jeff and he told me that Karen was undergoing chemotherapy for stage 3 breast cancer, not a good diagnosis. He said that they'd been married for over 30 years. They were both in their 50s. They had 3 children that were grown and out of the house. And Karen had always been able to be a stay-at-home mom. And so he said he wanted to let her know how much he loved her and cared about her. So when she started treatments, he said, I'm going to do all the cooking, the cleaning, and the shopping. I just want you to be able to rest, and concentrate on getting better. He said, but during that month, she seemed to become more and more withdrawn, and he couldn't figure it out why. He was doing everything he could for her. So I talked to him about the survey. And I said, the questions in the survey maybe could help start a conversation. Maybe you can find out what it is that is going on with her emotionally and spiritually. And maybe it would shed some light on why she seemed to be growing more and more apart from you. So he agreed. Well, I talked to Jeff about 3 or 4 weeks later. He called and asked to see me. And when we got together, we recounted their conversation. And so one of the questions on the survey is, how do you want to be treated? And so he asked her, he said, how do you want to be treated? She said, well, I wish you would have asked me that to begin with, instead of telling me what you were going to do for me. My identity, my role in our marriage has been to take care of the home and the family. And I love doing that. It gives me a sense of purpose and a sense of value. But when you told me that you were going to do all those things for me, you robbed me of my identity. Plus, I had more time to think about my cancer and what I might experience going forward. So that changed everything for him, because he was aware for the first time that things that he thought were the most important really weren't. But then one of the questions is what is your greatest fear? And so he asked her, he said, my greatest fear is that you'll die. So I'm sure that's your greatest fear too. But she surprised him by saying, no, my greatest fear isn't dying. My greatest fear is that I might be a burden to you and the children. And he was able to turn that around and help her by saying, so what if I had cancer? She said, what do you mean? And he said, well, what if I had cancer and I got really sick? Would I be a burden to you? She said, oh, of course not. You'd never be a burden to me. So he just looked at her and he said, so? And so she got it. And it changed everything for her. But what if they never had that conversation? What if Jeff, sensing Karen's growing distance, starts to think she doesn't appreciate him at all? And that what he's doing for her, which started as an act of love, becomes just another chore. And as the distance widens, maybe it becomes a burden. And Karen, on the other hand, having already lost her identity and assuming by his actions that Jeff doesn't care about what her wants and needs are. He's not addressing them. And then she senses the change in his attitude as he's doing her things, begins to resent him, thinking he doesn't care about me at all. Perhaps their relationship gets so far apart, so strained, that it hits a breaking point. I've talked to people after they've undergone chemotherapy who said that they've got divorced. Not that their marriage was bad before their treatment. It was during that time that they just couldn't communicate. At the end of our conversation, Jeff told me that him and Karen were closer now than they'd been in years. But it was because they were talking about their real feelings. They were open and they were asking. I learned two things working with oncology patients. The one is to appreciate life, because my patients, they appreciate life. Every day that they feel good's a good day. And it isn't things that we have. It's the relationships we have that make life worth living. Effective communication is the key to any relationship. And having intentional conversations leads to effective communication. Now, I was going through my residency. We learned that face-to-face communication is only 7% verbal, but it's 55% inflection, 38% body language. So to be able to have an intentional conversation, we need to listen intentionally. Not just to what we hear, but how those words are spoken. We need to listen actively. That means we need to watch the other person, be aware, be in tune, look for the body language, but also ask questions. Because when we ask questions, we make sure that we are understanding what the other person is saying. And when we are talking, if we ask questions about that, we know that we are being understood. And when we ask questions, we let the other person we're talking to know they're being heard. It validates who they are and what they're saying. And most importantly, it makes them feel important. It's by doing this that we can really be in tune with one another, to get to know one another, to connect with one another, and so to strengthen the bonds of our relationships. So I'd like to leave you with this. My cancer patients wanted me to leave you with this as well. Don't take life for granted. And don't take those you love and care about for granted. Embrace every day. And embrace those you love. Let them know how you feel. Listen, ask questions, be present. Thank you.